Story 1. House sitting and the owners explained that the dog doesn't go downstairs. It wasn't that the dog wasn't allowed or wasn't physically capable. The dog just refuses to go into the basement. Guess where the spare bedroom was? One night, after watching horror movies, I was lying in bed trying to talk myself out of being scared. I kept telling myself, it's just a basement. Don't freak yourself out. And then I heard glass shatter. Like an idiot, I went to investigate and found that a light bulb in the bathroom had exploded. Also like an idiot, I convinced myself that it was normal and a coincidence. So I went back to bed and resumed my pep talk. When the second light bulb shattered, the light switch was completely turned off both times. I decided to stop sleeping in the basement. Story 2. I lived in Seoul, South Korea, for a year and spent most of my time working in the army. I spoke no Korean. One morning, on my way to work from my apartment, I passed an elderly Korean man in the street whom I had seen on occasion before but never interacted with. He smiled and addressed me by my name and rank in perfect English, as if he knew me. I never wore my uniform on the way to work and only wore athletic clothing because I worked out before going to work. Story 3. When I was 5, I used to see a woman standing naked at the end of our apartment corridor. She would stand right in front of her door, just staring at me. I never told anyone about it. I think she may have been mentally ill. I hope she found help. Story 4. My husband and I have lived in our house for about 15 years. We have both experienced unexplained events, and our dog reacts to them. The scariest incident I can recall happened back in 2016 before we got our dog. At that time, I used to smoke cigarettes and would go out to the garage at night. I am a night person and always have been, so I was wide awake. I left the bedroom, walked down our wooden hallway, and took a short right turn. The garage door is around that corner. That layout is important for understanding what I heard. I was sitting on the steps in the garage with my back to the door that leads inside. I had been sitting there for maybe a minute or two when I heard loud footsteps running down the hallway, stopping right at the door behind me. It sounded like someone was wearing heavy boots, and my heart sank immediately, with the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I expected the door to swing open behind me with someone standing there. I was looking over my shoulder, watching the door handle, and I swear I was frozen in fear for a moment. I jumped up and ran down the stairs, not hearing anything else. Unsure of what to do, I stood there for a minute before finally gathering the courage to open the door. I shoved it open forcefully, just in case someone was hiding behind it. But there was no one there. The house was dark and quiet. I quickly turned on all the lights and checked every possible hiding spot. All the doors and windows were locked. We have no basement or attic, so no one could have hidden there. We have a sliding glass door in the dining room, but it was locked shut, and the locking bar was still secured at the bottom. I quickly turned off the lights and ran back into the bedroom, scared throughout the night. I listened for any unfamiliar sounds and barely slept. I still have no idea who or what that was. I am completely certain that the sound of running came from behind me in the house, and it was loud. Story 5. I was in my living room watching TV, with some grapes on the kitchen counter to warm up, still in the plastic container they come in, as I don't like foods being too cold. I heard a loud popping sound coming from the kitchen and felt a bit anxious, thinking someone was in my apartment. After a few moments, I gathered the courage to check the kitchen. There was a single grape lying in the middle of the floor, and the container was still unopened. I had no idea what had happened, but I was living across the street from a well-known haunted house at the time. Story 6. When I was a small child, I used to see a blue figure at night. It never hurt me. It was just there and kept me awake. My family tried to make it better and left out blue gifts from my friend. I don't think it was my friend. Story 7. I was 15 and home alone, working on some chores before babysitting. My older brother was out of state for 2 weeks, and my parents went to the doctor and to run errands. All of a sudden, I heard my brother's TV turn on in his room upstairs. I went to turn it off. 5 minutes later, his computer turned on. It was the same thing. A few minutes later, his radio went on, and so on. I was very busy and getting irritated, so I unplugged every electronic device in his room. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard everything turn on at full volume. I wasn't afraid. I was angry. I shouted up the stairs for whatever was up there to stop it because I swore that if I had to go back up there, then none of us would be happy. Everything turned off and stayed off. The day he was due back, I went and plugged everything back in. As I was leaving, his radio turned back on at full volume, and I just said, "I'm still not playing with you." Turned off. It was creepy, but I was mostly angry because I had a lot of chores to do, and it kept interrupting me. Story 8. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, I had a dream that a dog was attacking me and biting my right leg. I woke up, went downstairs, and greeted my grandmother, who was babysitting at the time. She gasped, clasped her hand against her mouth, and said, "What happened?" I looked down to see blood flowing from dozens of little puncture wounds on my leg. There is probably a reasonable explanation, but I have never figured out what it is. Story 9. I was in Chinatown in Oakland as a young high school female, grocery shopping with my mom. The aisles were narrow, and a man who looked homeless was walking towards me. I stepped forward to give him extra room to pass, but he didn't walk by. Instead, he rubbed against me while fully clothed. I turned around quickly, shocked and horrified. He said, "What?" I was trying to get through. I was so disturbed that I ran to the car and sat inside by myself, not even telling my mom when she finished shopping. I was traumatized by something that happened so quickly and in public, almost in disbelief. I don't think anyone else noticed, as they were all focused on shopping or checking out. That day, I learned that if an aisle is narrow and you're passing someone, you should do it face to face, not back to face. Never turn your back on anyone. Looking back as an adult, I realize I could have exited the aisle and returned later. I've learned to understand the extent of my personal space and the importance of setting boundaries if they are crossed, something I didn't grasp as a child. As a woman, I must be mindful of my surroundings and avoid potentially dangerous situations. Story 10. I was homeless in Oakland when someone approached me in the middle of the night and exposed themselves to me. It scared me, and I ran away screaming. Story 11. I was up late studying, completely focused on my notes. At some point, I glanced out the window and saw a cat just sitting outside. There was no ledge, no balcony, nothing it could possibly be standing on. I froze for a moment, then looked away without thinking. When I looked back, it was gone. I have no idea if it was an illusion or not, but I never saw it there again. Story 12. Does anyone else have a handful of interactions that evoke a dreadful gut feeling yet are impossible to articulate? I swear 3 of the scariest moments of my life occurred without any conversation. Once, when I was 16, I had a friend visiting from out of town. The day after her flight landed, we were walking in a relatively crowded park when a man, maybe in his mid-20s, came sprinting toward us from a distance, passing plenty of adults. He stopped, caught his breath, and started asking a series of questions in what seemed like an obviously fake British accent. His speech was frantic, and he asked things like, "What's the date?" and "What was this harbor built for?" Continually repeating, "I'm terribly jet-lagged. I'm so sorry." It didn't seem like just plain old mental illness. He was desperately seeking something. He began asking questions that were way too specific to my friend, about her sisters and her home state. I ended up telling him we had to go meet my mom, even though we didn't, and we quickly walked away. I know it doesn't sound like much, but the whole experience felt very off. I still think about it often. Story 13. I was sitting at a playground with my girlfriend when we were teenagers, and 2 elderly women came and sat on the seesaw, staring at us blankly as they went back and forth. Story 14. Recently, I began living alone for the first time in my life. 2 of my friends have keys to my place, but when I am home alone and not expecting anyone, I keep the latch on the door. So it was just me. One day, while brushing my teeth and bent over the sink, I was spitting and rinsing my mouth out. Right as I was standing back upright, it sounded like someone made a spitting sound from behind me, about a foot taller than me. I screamed so loud. I have convinced myself it was one of my cats sneezing and echoing in my bathroom, but it was certainly a very creepy experience. Story 15. I was at home, alone in the kitchen, doing the dishes. It was a bright, sunny day, absolutely nothing spooky about the situation. Suddenly, I felt a strong push from behind, which caused me to lurch forward, my hands submerged in the sink. There was no one there, not even a hint of a presence or feeling. I still wonder if it was some weird muscle spasm or something. Story 16. One day, my friend and I were walking by Merritt Lake. It was dark, and we heard some commotion by the water. It looked like some sort of ritual. It was strange, but we didn't stay, we left quickly. Story 17. I always joke about how my gray tance ghost is haunting my boyfriend and my living space. The ghost even moved apartments with us, as I have a pearl necklace that she gifted me when I was younger. One time, I was in my room back at my parents' house trying on some outfits and the pearl necklace. I usually kept it in the same box I originally received it in from her. This time, I thoughtlessly put it into a shoebox I had lying around on my desk. I was minding my own business until I suddenly saw some movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw that the box was slowly spinning. I walked over to investigate, thinking the box must have been standing unevenly or on the edge of a book beneath it. It wasn't. It was on a perfectly flat surface. I couldn't feel any wind, as my door and window were both shut. I looked inside the box, saw the necklace, and put it back where it belonged. Since then, we have had a few similar unexplained movements, always after I moved the box with the necklace inside while going through the drawer where I keep my jewelry. Now, when we hear any sudden sounds, as you tend to have with wooden furniture, I jokingly say, "Oh, what's the matter now, Auntie? Everything's okay." Story 18. I woke up to a laugh reminiscent of the live-action Green Goblin in the middle of the night in a house where everyone was asleep. The only television was off, and there were no radios. It scared me. Story 19. When I was around 15 or 16, I woke up in the middle of the night. There was a man in a hoodie just standing there and staring at me. I remember it took a long time for me to actually scream. When I finally managed to make a sound, the man turned around and walked slowly and calmly. He didn't steal anything, but it was clear he was looking for something, as all the cabinets were open. Story 20. 2 years ago, in the middle of March in Massachusetts at 2 a.m., I was sleeping on the couch when I was awakened by a knock on the door. For some reason, I opened it. I was greeted by a person maybe 4 feet 9 inches to 4 feet 11 inches tall, dressed in a parka with the hood up, obscuring their face. They asked me, "Do you know how to get to Venus?" I replied, "Get out of here," closed the door, and wondered what had just happened. Was it a kid pulling a prank? A crazy person? Why did they pick my house? Story 21. When I was 10, I would wake up to see a figure in a suit and tie in my room, except it had no head or neck. Instead, a pig nose floated where the head would be. Sometimes it would be sitting at my desk. Other times it would be standing in a corner. Once, I woke up to see it sitting on the end of my bed, another leaning over me. Even though it had no eyes, I knew it was watching me, and I felt incredibly unsafe. My elders from the Australian Aboriginal community got involved after that. My mom started letting my dog sleep in my room with me when I was brave enough to return, and eventually, it stopped appearing. There's still a part of me that goes to sleep afraid I'll wake up and see it again. Story 22. I was in my 40s visiting Esztergom, Hungary. I was at the statue of St. Stephen and decided to pick up cigarette butts because it bothers me when people carelessly throw trash around national monuments, regardless of the country. It started raining out of nowhere, with not a cloud in the sky. I stopped and appreciated the statue and the view. Story 23. I was a kid at the time. I was woken up from a nightmare by my little brother crying and screaming. My nightmare had been of a man standing in the hallway staring at me in the dark. I ran into my little brother's room, and my mother came in right after. She asked him why he was crying, and he said he had a nightmare of a man standing in the hallway staring at him in the dark. My mother started comforting him but was acting really strange. She calmed him down and got him back to bed. I hadn't said anything because I was a bit spooked that we'd had the same nightmare. Then, as she was going back to her room, I heard her tell my stepfather she was kind of freaked because she'd had the same nightmare. I still don't know why all three of us had the same nightmare at the same time. Story 24. When I was around 4 or 5 years old, my sister and I were having a slumber party with a few friends at our house. I remember having our music volume up loud as we danced and ate cotton candy. My mom gave us the 10 minutes before bed warning, but we continued our silliness. Out of nowhere, my mom ran and turned off our CD player and all the lights in the house. She told us to get on the floor and stay quiet. We were in the living room, scared and confused about why we were lying on the floor, as my mom looked out the blinds as subtly as she could. She then called my dad, who was working a night shift. I couldn't hear what she told him, but after the call, she went to her room and grabbed her shotgun. When she went to get the gun, my sister and I decided to look out the blinds. We saw an old man dressed in all black, holding a shovel and digging a hole in our front yard. We started crying and screaming in panic, especially knowing our dad wasn't there. Not even 2 minutes later, the doorknob to the front door started shaking, and we knew he was trying to get in. My mom stood in front of the door and cocked the gun so he would hear it. After that, he ran off. She called her brothers to check on the house and ensure he was gone, and they reported nothing. A couple of months later, a neighbor told my mom that the night before, she noticed a man dressed in all black standing at the end of our driveway, just staring at our house. She described him as statue-like and completely stoic. We never found out who the man was or what he planned to bury in our yard, but we didn't live there much longer to find out. Story 25. This story was told to me by my mother about 10 years after it happened. When I was young, we had an urban legend in our home about an old man who would abduct me if I didn't go to sleep. Later, I found out it wasn't my parents who made that up. It was me. Apparently, I claimed to see an old man around the house, but my parents didn't see him. I was very young at the time, maybe 2 or 3, so I don't remember this. Even years later, it still makes me feel uncomfortable. Story 26. A cold breath blew on the top of my head when I was at my friend's house. No one was behind me, no windows were open, and it wasn't winter. She said she saw a ghostly woman in her brother's room, so maybe it was her. Story 27. I had a piggy bank where I always put my spare change for my daughter. One night, I was home alone while she was at her mother's house. I was sitting and watching TV when I suddenly began hearing change drop into the piggy bank across the room from me. It started slowly, with 1 coin at a time, and then it ended when it sounded like a handful of change went in all at once. It only ever happened that one time. Story 28. I was 17 and working the graveyard shift at a local grocery store in a small town. It was the only grocery store around, a medium-sized establishment. The older guys I worked with swore this little grocery was haunted, but I didn't believe in that. Back then, people brought in beer bottles and cans to collect the deposit, and we stacked the bottles in boxes as high as we could while waiting for the vendor to pick them up every few days. Occasionally, the boxes would get saturated with beer, moisture, or water from the floor, causing them to collapse. When that happened, we would have a huge stack of beer bottles fall over, breaking and scattering all over the back room. One night, I was the only person working, stocking shelves around 3 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly, I heard one of those huge stacks of beer bottles crash down. I rushed to the back room, frustrated because I didn't have time to deal with a mess like that. When I arrived, everything was right where it was supposed to be. No bottles, no mess. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the front door waiting for the morning manager and told him I would never work alone overnight again. Story 29. I heard what sounded like a person being slammed against the floor in my living room one night. My parents heard it too, but we couldn't find anything after searching the house several times and the entire 2-acre property. We still have no idea what it was. Story 30. In the late 1990s, I worked at a Virginia Bath and Body Works as a manager. For the holiday season, I hired my then-boyfriend to work the stockroom, and it was great. Fast forward a year, my boyfriend and I broke up. He went to college in North Carolina, and I moved to Florida with my family. I stopped working at Bath and Body Works but had some intermittent contact with my ex until I got married a year after moving. It had been almost 2 years since I moved, when I decided to work as holiday staff at Bath and Body Works. I had not spoken to my ex for 6 months, and he had no way of knowing I went back to work for Bath and Body Works. This was in 2001, before social media. One day, I was opening a store transfer from a North Carolina store, and lo and behold, there was a personal note from my ex addressed to me at my new store. My ex was not a creep. In fact, if I had stayed in Virginia, I would have married him and likely been very happy. He was an awesome guy overall, and to this day I wish him good things. However, what was strange, and something I never got an answer to, was how he knew I had started working for them again and which store I was in. I was not a manager, just an associate, so my name was not on any store paperwork. It was rare to even do that. By all accounts, he was still just a stockroom guy. To this day, it's really weird to me, but also very sweet. Story 31. I was showering in a house we rented during university. 3 girls, my housemates, were doing their master's degrees, while I was a late bloomer in my second year of my bachelor's degree. Both housemates were not home that day, and we did not lock our rooms. The doors were usually left open unless we were sleeping or on a call. It was a bright, sunny winter afternoon, with nothing creepy or particularly scary happening. I was mid-shower when I distinctly felt a hand stroke my back, from the nape to the top of my buttocks. I screamed, grabbed a towel and my phone on the way out, and stood shivering in my front yard, calling my housemates to come home immediately. A neighbor saw me and took pity on the Asian girl shivering half-naked in winter, allowing me to sit in her dining room until my housemates returned. To this day, we are all convinced the house was haunted. There were other strange occurrences that my housemates experienced as well, and we all grew used to how the toilet door would rhythmically slam shut and then open again repeatedly, even when the air was completely still. We moved as soon as the lease was up. Story 32. I was working at a gas station at the time, and our dishwashing area was right next to the manager's office entrance. For added context, in the manager's office, we had a breaker box marked with specific switches to control the lights when locking up. That evening, I was in the back breaking down parts of the roller grill and washing dishes, completely alone in the building. Suddenly, I heard a loud slam, and the breaker box door, which was always open, was now closed so tightly and forcefully that I had to pry it back open. There wasn't any ventilation that would have caused that, and I know for a fact it was the breaker box because I had seen it open a couple of hours earlier when I went into the office to get something. Story 33. One night, my husband and I fell asleep watching unsettling videos. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a demon face turning toward the screen and growling. Half asleep and in complete darkness, it startled me, and I went searching for the remote. My husband woke up and also felt alarmed. We turned off the television and both laughed about how creepy the face was and how we reacted. The next day, we decided to watch the video that we had turned off, but there was nothing like what we saw. No demon face or anything. We went through our entire viewing history from the video we fell asleep to the one we turned off. We even watched a few related videos, and that face was not there. If it had just been one of us who saw it, I would have attributed it to being half asleep and misremembering. However, the fact that both my husband and I witnessed the exact same thing makes it even creepier to us. Story 34. I was making a salad in the kitchen when I peeled an avocado and put the skins in the garbage bin located in a cupboard under the sink. After returning to the opposite side of the kitchen to finish the salad, I turned around to find the avocado skins lying in the middle of the floor. I can explain it. I have witnessed enough paranormal activity in our home, but it amazes me that I didn't hear or sense anything happening less than 6 feet behind me. Story 35. Once, I went for a hike with a friend in rural West Virginia. We passed a man while parking our car and said hello. A storm appeared unexpectedly, and we had to return to the car only an hour later. My car broke down due to a flat tire a few miles from the main road. When I had it towed to a shop, the mechanic said there were also rocks in my transmission. He mentioned that he had never seen anything like that before and was unsure how it could happen. I can't help but think the man we passed on our way to the trail might have tampered with my car. I also wonder what his intentions would have been if he had seen my friend and me broken down on the side of the road. Story 36. Once, I had an apartment in Oakland. Then suddenly I was living on the street. I'm not sure what happened. Was it a missing time event? One day at a time, I suppose. Story 37. Last winter, I got snowed in at home. One evening, I was sitting on my sofa watching films. Directly behind my television stand is the patio door, which opens up to a large garden. For context, I live in a remote area. Anyway, I happened to look up and saw someone holding a large bloody knife, staring at me through the window, which scared me. Then they disappeared. I ran over, opened the doors to check outside, and saw footprints in the snow leading up to the door. I immediately locked the door and closed the curtains. As I turned around, I noticed wet footprints on the carpet leading behind the sofa. Nervously, I looked behind the sofa and found a bloody carving knife. Sleep well. Story 38. I was alone in the house when I saw a man walking his dog. I received a text from my dad to check the post. I opened the door and saw the shadow of the man walking his dog on the pathway. He didn't tell me to stop, so I closed the door and ran to the kitchen. There was a black figure, similar to the shadow by the door, blocking the trees. It wasn't moving, it just stood still. I looked away for 1 second, and the man and dog were gone. I ran to the window and they had vanished. I don't know what happened. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.